Hi, my name is Justina. I am 34 years old and, even though I don't particularly like to talk about myself, today for some reason I want to tell you a little more than usual, maybe because too many things have happened in my life over the past year to simply share them over a cup of coffee with a friend. I work as a VIP account manager for a large company that manufactures and sells medical equipment and, to be honest, this position is not just an entry in a workbook or a line on a resume, but the result of many years of painstaking, exhausting, but in some strange way satisfying work that requires not only professional knowledge, but also almost limitless patience, the ability to listen, persuade, adapt and, most importantly, remain calm even in the most absurd situations that arise when a dear client suddenly decides that he understands more about technology than the engineers who create this very equipment. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy. The salary is really good, so good that a year ago I finally managed to buy the house of my dreams, not some standard project from a country catalog, not a faceless box with plastic windows and dull walls, but a real house, with character, with history, with a space in which the possibility of comfort was immediately felt. The search for this ideal place became a real quest for me, a kind of internal pilgrimage, during which, moving from one end of the city to the other, I looked at houses with views of lakes, hills, noisy highways, and quiet alleys, but each time, as soon as I stepped over the threshold, I realized, not it, some were beautifully located, with panoramic windows and spiral staircases, but an absolutely crazy, illogical layout, in which the kitchen was further from the dining room than the garage is from the bedroom. Others pleased me with their perfectly proportioned rooms and fresh renovations, but they were located in areas where I would be afraid to go alone. Even during the day, over time, this process became truly tiring. I increasingly caught myself getting irritated, rolling my eyes tiredly when I heard another realtor cheerfully say, "Now this one is a real gem." But then I found it, a house that met all the points on my list and even those that I hadn't had time to think of. 3 spacious bedrooms, ideal for both living alone and entertaining. 2.5 bathrooms, each of which looked like it was designed by a person with a real sense of taste. A kitchen that combined granite countertops, wooden cabinets, and pleasant natural light pouring in from a wide window above the sink. Warm, almost oily shiny wooden floors throughout the house, pleasant to walk on barefoot even on a cool morning. And finally, the backyard, not too big, but so cozy that the first thing I did when I saw it was to imagine myself with a cup of coffee in my hands, sitting in a wicker chair in the morning sun. The only thing that slightly irritated my eyes in this house was the price, because even with all my financial stability and ability to plan expenses, I am still not a millionaire. But then again, isn't it for moments like these that we save, put aside, deny ourselves little things and tolerate bosses whose jokes have long ceased to be funny? I saved up enough for a solid down payment, and as soon as I looked through all the documents and signed the contract, I felt such a surge of joy and relief that I was even surprised. Is it possible to be so happy about square meters? The deal went faster than I expected. The mortgage was approved almost instantly, as if the world itself decided, yes, Justina, you deserve it, and here it is, your home. Having received the keys, I decided to throw a small housewarming party. I am not the kind of person who throws noisy gatherings just to tick off the calendar, so everything was modest. Only the closest ones, my parents, my younger sister Laura, a couple of second cousins with whom we maintain warm relations, and maybe 4 or 5 colleagues from work, the same ones with whom I can laugh during lunch break, and after a difficult meeting exhale on the balcony, sharing a short what a day. The evening turned out to be warm, a little bustling, with the aromas of homemade pies, light champagne and music that I selected according to the mood. A little jazz, a little soul, nothing flashy, because I have always believed that a real meeting is when people hear each other. Laura, who was 27 at the time, arrived as usual, bright and noisy, a little later than everyone else, with a bouquet twice her height, and with an expression on her face as if she were about to throw the party of the century. As always, she remarked from the doorway, "Juice, you could have invited more people. Where's the fun?" and, laughing, ruffled my hair, as if we were children again, and not 2 grown women with different views on life. I only smiled in response, knowing that arguing with Laura was pointless, and yet, slightly shrugging my shoulders, I remarked, "I like it when people talk, and don't shout over the music. "You're just getting old, sis," she laughed, and it seems that even then there was not mockery in her voice, but a light, almost affectionate irony. From that day on, she began to visit me more and more often. At first, she would pass by on weekends, she would decide to drop in, see how things were going, and then the visits would start happening during the week, too, sometimes just like that, for no reason, and on her part it looked like friendly concern. Laura rents a small one-room apartment on the other side of town, and probably my house with its spacious rooms, well-kept garden and comfortable kitchen seemed especially attractive to her compared to her cramped, noisy, sometimes stuffy space, in which strangers' voices constantly sounded from behind the thin walls, and the window overlooked a busy road along which cars rolled from morning until night, leaving behind noise and dust. When she came to me, her behavior immediately became free, even excessively so. She would throw off her shoes right at the entrance or, more often, in the middle of the living room. Without bothering to carefully place them on the rug, she would open the refrigerator without a trace of embarrassment, as if it belonged to her, take out a yogurt or a piece of cheese, and, sitting down on a bar stool, begin to eat leisurely, leaving behind open packages, lids, spoons, as if she were following an unspoken rule: if the food is tasty, there is no need to clean up after yourself. I tried to talk to her, not with malice, not with reproach, but calmly, even gently, explaining that I would like certain rules to be observed in my house, so that the order and cleanliness that I so diligently sought would be preserved not only when I was home alone, but also when loved ones came to visit. However, every time I raised this issue, Laura immediately took a defensive position, as if I was accusing her of something serious. She would either accuse me of being a control freak or would say, with obvious irritation, that I was obsessed with cleanliness and that it's impossible to relax in this house because you're afraid to leave a mug on the table. Gradually, I realized that every conversation on this topic ended the same way. Laura would get offended, raise her voice, and I would feel guilty for having said anything at all, so I just started cleaning up after her myself. It turned out to be easier. It was quicker to pick up a towel from the bathroom floor or gather up her scattered clothes than to endure accusations of being too strict and cold, than to hear again, "You just don't know how to be a sister, Juice." Against this background, my boss's offer sounded like a bolt from the blue. I still remember how he called me into his office, the one with the flow charts and quarterly figures hanging on the walls, where it smelled of coffee and paper, and began to speak with an unusual, almost solemn expression on his face. He told us about potential clients in Europe, about private clinics that were interested in our equipment and were ready to discuss contracts for millions of dollars. These were not just new partners, this was an opportunity for the entire company to reach a fundamentally new level. And then he said, "Justina, you are our best specialist, you know how to negotiate, create trust and understand every technical nuance. These clients need exactly this approach, attentive, deep, individual. I want you to do this personally." Then he mentioned a 3-month trip around Europe, about presentations, meetings, contracts. "This can change your entire career," he concluded, and I felt a chill run down my spine, from excitement, from fear, from anticipation. I agreed, of course, but when I was left alone, the office became too quiet, and this silence was filled with doubts. 3 months is a long time, not a vacation, not a week-long business trip, but a whole quarter of my life, and my home, this cozy, carefully furnished, long-awaited home, cannot just stand empty. I began to prepare for the trip. I scheduled meetings, collected information about clients, made presentations, clarified logistics, right down to renting cars in different countries. I ordered the installation of a video surveillance system, 3 external cameras and 2 internal ones, including one in the living room, because I wanted to see what was happening. Even being thousands of kilometers from home, the cameras were installed quickly, connected to the cloud service. Everything worked, the picture was clear, the sound was recorded, the app on the phone showed notifications at the slightest movement. After that, I went to my parents. Their house hadn't changed in decades. Old photos on the walls, the familiar smell of homemade buns, and the TV always on with some quiet soap opera. I sat down at the kitchen table, folded my hands in front of me, and said, "Mom, I need your help. I'm going to Europe for 3 months, and I need someone to watch the house. Just check that everything is in order, water the plants, vacuum once a week. I'll leave a spare key." Mom took the key, put it next to the cup, thought for a second, and then said, "You know, Justina, It would be easier if Laura stayed there while you were gone. She could take care of the house every day, and I wouldn't have to drive across town. I felt my insides tighten. The thought of Laura moving into my house, free to rule it like her own territory for 3 months, was not just unpleasant to me, it was terrifying. Mom, I said as gently as I could, I'd prefer if you checked it yourself. Remember what her room was like when she was a child? Constant chaos, clothes lying around, unwashed dishes, trash everywhere. She doesn't know how to keep things tidy. Mom sighed, her voice becoming a little sharper. You're exaggerating, Laura's not that bad, you're just too strict about everything, especially the house. I realized that our conversation had reached a dead end, but I tried again, calmly, without pressure. Mom, please, I don't want to start an argument. Just water the flowers and make sure everything is in order. It will make me feel better. I don't want Laura living there while I'm gone. Mom sighed and nodded, her face softening for a moment, as if she had finally decided to put aside her disagreement for the sake of her daughter's peace of mind. Okay, Justina, I'll take care of your house myself, she said, and there was no offense in her voice, only fatigue and some shadow of misunderstanding that I had long ago learned not to discuss. Thank you, I answered with real relief, with that quiet gratitude that does not require extra words, and which is increasingly difficult to express in our family, where even simple agreements often turn into hidden reproaches. We talked for a few more minutes about the travel routes, about my schedule, about the countries I would go to, and about how I would definitely try to find time to write a postcard from Paris, like in childhood, when every trip was a holiday. Getting ready to leave, I went into the bathroom, to wash up, to put in order the thoughts that had been jumbled in my head after the conversation. On the way back to the hallway, I heard voices. Mom and Dad were talking in the kitchen, not knowing that I had not yet left. Their words touched me instantly, like thin needles digging into my skin. That girl is too demanding, my mother said, and there was not a drop of sympathy in her voice, and she is so selfish when it comes to Laura. Her sister just wants to help, and Justina acts like she is some kind of criminal. I froze in the doorway, unable to take a step, clutching the strap of my bag in my fingers, and a pain suddenly struck my chest with force, not just from the words, but from the ease with which they were spoken, from how easily I was again made wrong, cold, callous, unable to appreciate my sister's intentions. I was not unreasonable. I knew what Laura was like, I knew her habits, her frivolity, her attitude towards other people's things, towards the space in which she lived, but apparently, the desire to protect my home, my personal space, which I had created over the years, became, in my mother's eyes, a sign of selfishness. Not wanting to hear another word, I quietly opened the front door and left without saying goodbye, with a heavy feeling in my chest, with a feeling of betrayal where I had hoped there would always be understanding. So I went on a business trip to Europe with a particularly strong desire to switch off, to distance myself, to erase from my consciousness everything that had remained at home. The first few weeks were fast-paced, filled with flights, changing cities, the noise of terminals, business meetings, and dinners with potential clients. I flew between London, Paris, Berlin, Amsterdam, presenting our company's products, not just devices, but high-tech, vital equipment, the latest models of ventilators, surgical complexes, diagnostic modules that can significantly reduce the time it takes to make a diagnosis. These were not ordinary presentations, they were carefully thought out, technically rich speeches, followed by long discussions, adjustments to proposals, detailed calculations of supplies and service conditions. The working day began at 7 in the morning, with business breakfasts, where every word had to be weighed, and ended late in the evening analyzing data, preparing for the next meeting, collecting new information. Every evening I returned to the hotel room, where time seemed to stand still and the silence weighed on my shoulders. I took a hot shower, allowed myself to stare at the ceiling for a few minutes, and then, already in my robe, sat down at the laptop to read documents again, edit slides, double-check specifications. It was tiring, exhausting, but there was also something liberating in it. Complete immersion in work pushed out everything unnecessary. At first, I called my mother 3 or 4 times, short conversations in which she cheerfully reported each time that she had been to my house, watered the plants, dusted the living room, and that everything looked great. Her confident, calm voice brought relief. I really began to believe that everything was under control, that I could relax at least in this. But after about a month, something strange happened. Something that turned my inner calm upside down. It was an evening in Munich, a particularly grueling day. First a presentation at one of the largest clinics, then a dinner with potential investors, wine, conversations, negotiations, and here I was, back in my room, barely alive enough to take off my shoes, collapsing on the bed with my phone in my hand, deciding to just scroll through my social media feed to feel at least some presence at home, and then I saw her post. Laura had written, "This is great news for everyone. Got a promotion and planning a huge party next week. You all know where this is going." Followed by winking and laughing emojis, as if she was announcing something innocent and fun. I stared at the screen, a cold wave of anxiety rising in my chest. Where was she going to throw this party? Her apartment was so small that it could hardly comfortably accommodate 10 people, let alone a huge celebration. I started reading the comments, one after another, as if searching for an excuse, a rational explanation, but with each new message the anxiety grew. "Oh my God, Laura, are you really doing this in that place?" One of her friends wrote, "Girl, you are so brave, what if she finds out?" Another added. Someone wrote, "This is going to be epic, I can't wait to see the look on her face. If she ever finds out what happened in her precious home." My heart started pounding. My palms started sweating, and I barely breathed as I continued reading. Laura responded with laughing emojis and the phrase, "If she knew what I was going to do in her house, she would absolutely lose her mind." I froze, phone in hand, unable to believe that I was reading this. They were clearly talking about my house, otherwise they wouldn't have hidden the details, wouldn't have spoken so meaningfully. And then, as if confirming my worst fears, a photo appeared. It was the bar area in my living room, the one I had spent so long decorating, with shelves calibrated to the centimeter, with bottles that meant more than just alcohol. I recognized expensive whiskey, a gift from my boss for a successfully concluded deal, vintage wine from colleagues, imported vodka from a European partner. All of this stood against the backdrop of my interior, my home, now someone else's. Laura was definitely planning a party to celebrate her promotion at my house, and judging by the comments on her post, she was planning on inviting a lot of people, far more than any reasonable boundaries would allow, especially in a space that was not hers and in which I knew she felt like a free mistress, completely ignoring the fact that every corner of this house had been arranged by me with love, with patience, with effort, and that this house for me was not just a building with four walls, but an extension of my personality, my only truly personal space. I could not sit and watch this happen. How she turned everything I carefully preserved into a rented space for a noisy orgy of strange voices, spills, laughter, smells and unfamiliar footsteps. I immediately, almost automatically, dialed Laura's number, feeling my heart pounding in my throat, echoing in my temples, in my chest, in my fingers that were barely holding the phone. When she answered, her voice was cheerful, as if everything that was happening was a casual prank. "Hi," she sang, and I clenched my teeth, took a deep breath, trying to speak calmly, not to let my emotions break through before the words. "Hi, Laura, congratulations on the promotion, I saw your post about it," I began, and of course she heard in response, "Oh, thank you, Justina. Yes, I am absolutely thrilled, it has really been a long journey. So, are you planning a party to celebrate?" I asked, hoping, without any faith, that she might be telling the truth, but instead, Laura, without a trace of hesitation, answered, "Yeah, just a little get-together, nothing too crazy, I think we'll go out to a restaurant somewhere." She was lying, and I knew it. I'd just seen the photo of my bar, the comments from her friends, the girlfriends, the people who didn't know me personally but were already planning to party at my house like they owned it. "Laura, don't lie to me," I said, keeping my voice under control despite the turmoil inside. "I know you're planning to throw a party at my house." There was a pause on the other end, a long, hollow, ringing silence, as if she was still trying to figure out how to get out of this, then a sigh and a cold, "Look, I don't know what you're talking about, Laura. I saw the photo of my bar you posted, you're bragging about my liquor collection to your friends like it's yours." Another pause, and then her voice changed abruptly. Became prickly, defensive, as if I were accusing her of a crime. "Okay, fine, yes, I'm planning on throwing a party at your house, so what?" "So what?" I couldn't believe my ears. "Laura, you can't just use my house for a party without asking me," I said, biting back the rising indignation. "Why not? It's empty anyway, and I'm looking after it for you." By the way, how many people are you planning on inviting? I asked, already knowing I didn't want to hear the answer. About 90, she said calmly, as if she were talking about 6, maybe 10, 90 people. In my house. I felt something inside me snap. Laura, are you crazy? You're planning on bringing 90 strangers into my house? They're not strangers, they're my friends and coworkers. Do you know how much it costs to rent a place for that many people? I'm not a millionaire, this promotion is a major step in my career. I deserve to celebrate properly. I absolutely forbid you from throwing this party at my house, I said sharply, finally losing my temper. Find another place, anywhere, but not at my place. And then she laughed, that laugh, flippant, barbed, mocking. You're not going to ruin this for me, Justina, this is my moment, and I'm not going to let you ruin it just because you're paranoid about your precious home. And before I could answer, she hung up. I immediately tried calling back, but she didn't answer. The phone rang until it went to voicemail. I tried 3 more times, but it was clear she was deliberately ignoring my calls. With desperation in my voice and shaking hands, I called my mother. Hey, Justina. How's your trip going? Her voice was cheerful, even upbeat, as if nothing in the world was happening. Mom, we need to talk. I just found out that Laura is planning a party at my house. Why is she even there? I asked, trying to keep my composure. There was a long pause on the other end, and then Mom, slowly, in a tone I'd come to recognize as defensive, said, well, I thought it would be easier. Instead of me going to your house every few days, Laura could stay there and take care of everything. It made sense. Mom, I told you straight out that I don't want Laura living in my house. I asked you to take care of it yourself. Justina, you're being dramatic. Laura loves your house and takes good care of it. Everything is fine. Everyone is happy. I'm not happy, I replied, holding back a scream. And now she's planning a huge party for 90 people. You need to tell her to cancel and find another place. Mom's voice immediately took on that familiar tone she always used when she thought I was being unfair or unreasonable. Justina, Laura just got a promotion. It's a big deal. Can't you just let her celebrate? She can celebrate anywhere, Mom, anywhere, just not in my house, not with 90 strangers, with alcohol, with noise, with risks. This is not a whim, this is a boundary. You're too demanding and selfish, Mom said sharply, and her voice didn't sound like a woman trying to smooth things over, but like someone who had long ago decided whose side she was on. Laura worked hard for this promotion. I'll make sure she cleans up after the party, it'll be fine. It's just one night. Before I could say anything else, before I could muster the words to try and explain why this was important to me, why this wasn't just a whim but an act of self-defense, Mom hung up, too, as if both she and Laura had already decided that my opinion on the matter didn't matter. I sat in the dim light of the hotel room, clutching my head in my hands, not believing that all this was really happening. My sister and my mother, the 2 people closest to me, hung up on me on the same evening, cutting off the conversation, as if I were not their real daughter and sister, but an annoying controller who was preventing them from having fun. I tried unsuccessfully to call my mother back several times. Each time the receiver remained unanswered, and soon the phone began to automatically switch to voicemail. My heart was pounding so hard that it seemed to drown out the sound of all the messages that I began to feverishly type. First to Laura, firmly, clearly, restrained, but categorically, I wrote that I was categorically against holding a party in my house, that her behavior was unacceptable, and demanded that she immediately leave my house and return to her apartment. Then to my mother, with the same message, although without hope of understanding. Laura's response was almost a sophisticated mockery, a single laughing emoji, light and empty and yet incredibly stinging, like an acknowledgement that my feelings, my boundaries, my no were just a joke, a stupidity that could be ignored. My mother didn't respond at all, not a word, not an attempt to explain, not an excuse, not even a dry read. I sat in my hotel room, feeling angry, frustrated, and increasingly helpless. I was thousands of miles away from home, in a different time zone, exhausted from endless meetings and flights, trying my best to ensure our company had long-term contracts and stability for years to come. And at the same time, my own family was betraying me behind my back, using my trust, my property, my home, as if it were nothing. And then I had an idea. If they wanted to play games, if they wanted to pretend that my words didn't matter, then I could play a game, too. I would let Laura have the party, I wouldn't call anymore. I wouldn't text anymore, I wouldn't argue, I would just wait, I would watch, because I had a plan. And this time they couldn't say I'd made it up. The week dragged on. Painfully slowly, I was deep in work, concentrating on preparing for more meetings, finalizing contracts, but somewhere in the back of my mind, beneath all that business-like focus and diplomatic composure, I felt a storm brewing. I thought about what was probably going on in my house: Laura, insanely preparing for her big night, handing out invitations, writing out menus, buying snacks, and planning what music to play, opening my cabinets, touching my things, using my dishes as if they were all hers. I checked the security cameras around the house several times during the week, and each time I cringed at what I saw. Laura lived there as if she were at home. She received guests, drank my wine, left dirty glasses and plates on the tables, threw jackets on the back of my sofa, and sometimes even on the floor. My house looked like a battlefield where the battle for respect had long been lost. And then the day of the party arrived. I was in a hotel in Amsterdam, and although I had one of the most important meetings of the entire trip scheduled for the morning, with representatives of a large private clinic, on whose decision a multi-million-dollar contract depended, I could not concentrate on either the documents or the presentation. All my thoughts were on what was about to begin in my house. Around 7 o'clock in the evening, Amsterdam time, it was about 1 o'clock at home. I opened my laptop, connected to the video surveillance app, and began to watch what was happening in real time. First, I saw Laura running around the house, moving furniture, hanging up some decorations, carrying trays and bags around the rooms. Then people started arriving, first one by one, then in groups, a lot of people, far more than could comfortably fit in the living room, let alone observe any rules of decency. I watched as they came through my front door one by one, shoes still on, plastic cups in hand, laughing, talking loudly. They acted as if this was a rented hall for the evening, not someone's personal home. Someone had set up a speaker with music that was blaring so loudly that I could hear it even through the camera microphone. Someone was pouring alcohol standing right next to my bar, spilling whiskey on the floor, throwing bottle caps into flower pots. The crowd grew like a wave. At one point I counted at least 60 people in the living room, and people kept coming, into the kitchen, into the backyard, even upstairs, into the bedrooms, where they definitely didn't belong. I watched in horror as they emptied my bar, all those bottles I had collected over the years, each one holding a story, a gift, a token of gratitude or a lucky event. They were passed from hand to hand, opened without ceremony, drunk straight from the bottle. Someone opened an expensive bottle of champagne that was supposed to be used for a special occasion and poured it into plastic cups. Someone used my glasses, not even bothering to remove the ice from the day before. It was like my worst nightmare come true. And Laura? She acted like the queen of the ball, like the mistress of the mansion, as if the house belonged to her. She was showing people around the rooms, showing them my books, telling them about kitchen design, laughing, taking pictures, posting videos on stories. And I, sitting thousands of miles away, saw all this and couldn't believe that no one present was wondering, where is the hostess? Why isn't she here? And is it even possible to throw a party in someone else's house without her consent? I was watching my worst nightmare unfold in real time, as my home, my fortress, the place where I felt protected from the outside chaos, was turning into an arena for someone else's fun. Noisy and thoughtless, and I could do nothing to stop this nightmare, being thousands of miles away, in another time zone, in a hotel room from which it was impossible to intervene or physically return. But there was one thing I could do, one, but very effective. I picked up the phone, opened my address book, and, clenching my fingers with tension, dialed not 911 but my hometown police hotline, knowing I was doing the right thing. Because when your family itself stops respecting your boundaries, the only thing left is the law. Police department, how can I help you? Came a level voice on the other end of the line, and I steeled myself and spoke clearly. Hello, I need to report a break-in at my home. I'm out of the country on business, and CCTV shows that there is a large group of strangers in my home right now. The operator got straight to the point, his voice growing more attentive. What's your address, ma'am? I gave him the address, explaining that I was connected to the CCTV system and could confirm what was happening right now. We'll send officers out immediately to check, he assured me. Thank you, I said, and, having dropped the call, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the laptop screen, which now seemed like a portal to the center of the destruction of my personal world. About 10 minutes after the call, I saw flashing lights on camera. 3 police cars were slowly pulling up on the street in front of my house, and officers were pouring out, determined and silent, with headlamps, batons, and shortwave radios. Then everything happened with cold, inexorable consistency. They came to my front door and rang the bell, but of course no one heard. The music was so loud that it seemed to shake the walls. And even on camera the sound was muffled, like in a club. One of the officers began pounding his fist, patiently at first, then louder. Finally, the door opened, and Laura appeared on the threshold, her hair disheveled, in a bright dress, and her face in which panic was gradually replacing the usual complacency. I saw her start gesturing rapidly, talking, making excuses, occasionally pointing into the house as if she was trying to prove that she had every right to be there. One of the officers was asking her questions, another was standing a little further away, listening to the noise from inside, and the third was looking at the screen of his tablet, apparently checking information. Laura's expression showed that something had gone wrong. Then what I expected happened, but I still jumped when my phone rang. It was Laura. I answered, and chaos immediately sounded in the receiver. Shouts, music, the noise of voices, and above all, Laura's agitated, almost hysterical voice. Justina, the police are at your house. I'm on speakerphone with them now. Tell them that I'm allowed to be here and that everything is okay. I heard that she really turned on the speakerphone. The officers were probably listening too, and one of the guests standing nearby probably heard my words. I exhaled, sat up straight in my chair, and spoke calmly, clearly, with the cold determination you develop when you're cornered. Officer, I'm Justina Levine, the owner of this house. I'm in Europe on business, and I did not give my sister or any of these people permission to be in my home. They are trespassing. I ask that you remove them. Immediately, there was a deathly silence on the line, as if everyone had frozen. I heard Laura sob, and then scream, Justina, what are you doing? These are my friends. This is my promotion party. I told you not to have it at my house, I replied, still in the same even tone. You chose to ignore me, and now you're paying the consequences. One of the officers took the phone from her, and a more formal, male voice came on the line. Ma'am, this is Officer Rodriguez. Do you confirm that you want all of these people off your property immediately? Yes, officer, I answered without hesitation. None of them have my permission to be there. Please escort them all off the house. The officer thanked her, handed the phone back to Laura, and the next second I heard her voice rise to a scream. You. I didn't have time to make out the exact words she said, but I guessed from the intonation. How could you do this to me? This was supposed to be my special evening. And without waiting for an answer, she hung up. I turned my attention back to the CCTV cameras to see the continuation of this senseless, destructive play unfolding, into which I had been dragged without my consent, on a stage that was rightfully mine alone, because everything that was happening, every step, every voice, every sound, was a continuation of the deep rift that had opened between me and my family. And now, sitting in a hotel chair in Amsterdam, I felt the pain and hurt dissolving into a cold, almost emotionless determination. The police had already entered and were calmly but firmly telling everyone present that they needed to leave the house immediately because they were on private property without the owner's permission, and most of the guests, albeit with obvious bewilderment and confusion, reluctantly began to collect their things. Some grabbed coats, some bottles, some their phones with unfinished cocktails. All this accompanied by muttering, complaints and a puzzled hum from the crowd, who did not expect that their fun evening would suddenly turn into a scandalous evacuation. But of course, Laura wasn't going to give in without a fight. I watched as one of the officers calmly but insistently asked her to step aside, to retreat from the entrance so as not to interfere with the guests leaving the premises, but she, without wasting a second, began to gesticulate indignantly, raise her voice, trying to prove something, to justify something, and then, as if in a desperate attempt to regain control, tried to squeeze past him, stepping forward, as if she was going to enter the house, despite a direct order to leave. And when the officer, fulfilling his official duty, put his hand on her shoulder to stop her, Laura lost her composure, her face distorted with rage. She began to break free, pushing him away, screaming so that the sound penetrated even through the speakers of my laptop. I couldn't believe that I was actually watching my little sister fight with a police officer because she didn't want to leave my house, which she had invaded without permission. By throwing a party, Despite my numerous prohibitions, a few seconds later, 2 colleagues approached the officer, and the 3 of them restrained Laura, who continued to scream, trying to break free, pushing her feet against the floor, as if hoping to hold on to this piece of territory to which she had neither rights nor respect. Her hands were pulled behind her back, handcuffs clicked, and despite them, she continued to shout incoherent phrases, indignation, curses, excuses. The police took her to one of the cars, opened the back door and sat her inside, closing the door behind her. By this time, the guests had already left, some silently, some whispering and looking at each other, some apologizing, some demonstratively ignoring what was happening, and the house was finally empty again. It took me a moment to realize how tightly my fingers were clenched on the arm of the chair, and only now did I allow myself to take a deep breath. I opened the phone book and called my neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, an elderly woman with a kind heart and a sharp mind, with whom I had a good relationship. Mrs. Peterson, this is Justina. Sorry to call you so late, but I have an emergency and I really need your help. Could you come to my house and lock it? The police have just thrown out some unwanted guests, and I need someone to watch the house until I get back. Of course, dear, I just saw the police cars. I was wondering what was going on. I'll go right now. Thank you very much. Just lock all the doors and take the key with you. I'll contact you as soon as I get back. Don't worry. Everything will be under control. An hour later, the phone rang, Mom's name on the screen, and I answered, gritting my teeth, knowing what was coming. Her voice was at its limit, loud, furious, vibrating with accusations. Justina, how could you do this to your own sister? Laura is in the police station because of you. Laura is in the police station because she broke into my house and threw a party there without permission. And then attacked the police when they asked her to leave. She didn't break in. I gave her the key. You gave her the key so she could water the plants, not so she could move in with me and throw parties, and I told you clearly that I didn't want her living there, remember? You need to call the police and fix this. Get your sister out of jail. No, I said calmly. Laura made a choice. Now she's reaping the consequences. I warned her, but she still did it her way. Now she can deal with it. You're cruel and vindictive, Mom growled, and I simply ended the call and turned off my phone. The next morning, I turned it back on and saw dozens of missed calls and texts, Mom, Dad, Laura, all trying to get through. From the voicemails, I learned that Laura's parents had to post bail to get her out of the station she was charged with resisting arrest. Later, the police called to ask if I wanted to file a formal report for trespassing. I said, no, I don't want revenge. I just want her to stay away from my house. Then I contacted Mrs. Peterson and asked her to hire a cleaning company to clean everything up. I promised to compensate for all the costs and add on top for all the inconvenience and help. I lived the remaining weeks of my business trip in complete radio silence. I blocked all my family members' numbers, focused solely on work, and found, to my surprise, that this silence was like a bomb. I no longer woke up with anxiety. I no longer jumped at every notification on my phone. I no longer felt constant pressure. I closed several key contracts that ensured not only my professional credibility but also stability for many years. When I finally returned home 3 months later, my first stop was Mrs. Peterson's house. I thanked her in person, handed her a gift from Europe and an envelope with money for cleaning services. She just smiled and said, you did everything right, dear. They need to understand that you have boundaries. A week passed, and then one morning, as I had just put the kettle on and was about to enjoy my first truly free Saturday morning, there was a knock on the door. My parents and Laura were standing on the threshold. They were cold, reserved, but there was determination in their eyes. We need to talk, Mom said, walking past me, as if she still felt entitled to act without an invitation. You owe us $5,000. We paid Laura's bail, she accused. I laughed, really, heartily. Are you serious? You want me to pay for her being arrested for trespassing in my own home? You created this situation. Laura countered, I just wanted to throw a promotion party. You threw it, Laura, without permission, in my house. I pulled out my laptop, opened the folder with my video archives, and silently played the video. They watched without interrupting as Laura lived in my house for weeks, making a mess, inviting guests, drinking my alcohol, and acting like she owned everything. When the recording ended, I looked at them. You all betrayed me. You lied, you went behind my back, you ignored my Boundaries, I can't trust you anymore, Dad, for the first time in a long time, tried to intervene. Justina, we can work this out. No, Dad, we can't, I need time, I need to figure out if I even want a relationship with people who don't think my no is important. I asked them to leave, they left. Mom, leaving, couldn't help but say, you disappointed us. That was 6 months ago, I haven't spoken to any of them since. I changed the locks, updated the security system, and now I live in a house where there is finally peace, order, and no drama again. Leave a comment on what you think of this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.